And we're on the air. Hello, friends. Welcome to Code Mentor Office Hours. Thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time joining an Office Hours, basically what we do is we have on all different experts of different types of technologies that we're fans of and sort of teach us what they know and answer a bunch of your questions. Today I'm really happy to welcome Jason Weathersby. Jason is a technical evangelist for Mozilla. He evangelizes for Firefox OS, developer tools, and all things for the open web. He's also a committer on the BIRT project at the Eclipse Foundation and has co-authored several books and written many articles on BIRT integration. He's a proponent of HTML5, the open web, and open source, and is a regular contributor to the Mozilla Hacks blog. Jason has over 20 years experience in the software development field, ranging from real-time process control to business intelligence software. He's joining us today from South Carolina. He'll be talking to us about developing apps with Firefox's unique DevTools and answer your questions. Jason, thank you for joining us. And if this is your first, I should mention, if any of you guys, it's your first time joining us, we usually have a lot of action going on in the group chat, so feel free to throw questions in there. If you're watching the live broadcast room, there's a Q&A app you can use, and we'll hit as many questions as we can towards the end. But without further ado, please welcome Jason.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to be here today, and I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm going to screen share now, and basically what I'm going to do is break the presentation down into two parts, where I'm going to show some slides to begin with, and then we'll work through some live demos showing how to use tools to develop apps for Firefox OS. So I'll go ahead and screen share. All right. As Mark said, my name is Jason Weathersby. There's my contact information. If we don't get to all your questions, feel free to contact me on Twitter or through my email address and ask away. As I stated before, we're going to first off, I'm going to walk through just an overview of what Firefox OS is and how it's being used, and some of the cool features that we've been adding in the last couple of months. And then I'll walk through all the developer tools showing how to manipulate and develop and tune a Firefox OS app. So with that said, I'll put this overly complex diagram up that explains what Firefox OS is. Firefox OS, on its essence, is essentially an HTML5 based operating system. It's composed of 3 layers. At the lowest layer, it's a Linux kernel with all of the drivers for the different hardware and things like that. And then on top of that is Gecko, which is the same web runtime engine that we use in our browser. The only addition is it has a few more APIs that have been added for things like geolocation and vibration, light sensors, proximity sensors, things that are very specific to the phones. That's the Gecko layer. And then on top of that is Gaia. That is the user interface for Firefox OS. That is also where you install your apps, and it's all HTML5 based. JavaScript, CSS, and HTML5. And I'm going to show debugging some apps live shortly. That said, why did we create Firefox OS? Well, we know that many new markets are emerging and coming online, and we wanted to offer an affordable, easy to develop for operating system for those emerging markets. We wanted it to be very affordable. We wanted to set it up to where you didn't need a credit card for client billing. You could just be billed directly. And we wanted to have it be web technologies through and through, and that's open web technologies. And currently we're released in 29 countries, including Brazil, Colombia, Germany, and we're available in the second part of this year. We're going to be, Q2 will be available in parts of the Middle East and Africa. We have 13 operators, including Telefonica and Telenor. And we have 16 smartphones. And later this year, Mozilla is working with several wireless partners like Verizon to plan some various different form-factored phones for 2016. Okay. Firefox is not just for phones, though. We're seeing a lot of uptake and using it for other applications. For example, Panasonic will be releasing a TV this summer that's running Firefox OS, and this is essentially a screenshot of the Firefox OS application running as on the TV itself. In addition, we see it being used in things like the Matchstick device, which is a video streaming device. We've seen KDDI out of Japan has got an open web board for doing IoT applications with Firefox OS. Mozilla Japan and their community are working on a board called the Cherryman board, and I spelled it board wrong. But basically, it's for IoT, WOT type operations. It's running Firefox OS. And in addition to that, Telenor has developed an always-on camera project called the Gonzo project for development purposes and experimentation, which is pretty cool. Firefox has also been ported to Raspberry Pi. In addition to that, we've seen apps written on Firefox OS that communicate to Raspberry Pis that are running like Node.js. So in our view, what makes an open web app? And for Firefox OS, this is nothing more than a standard web app with a manifest attached to it. And this manifest looks something like this. What the manifest defines is things like the name, the description, the launch path, icons, things like that. But it also defines permissions that are going to be used by the app. For example, if you want to use geolocation, you'll specify a permission in the manifest files stating that. We have three types of apps that can be put on Firefox OS. We have hosted apps, privileged apps, and certified apps. Hosted apps are technically apps that are stored on your server, and you can update. But with that they have limited permissions to access parts of the hardware and APIs. So the next level up is a packaged app, and a privileged app is a packaged app. It's taking all your assets and zipping them up and adding a privileged status to the manifest and any permissions that you want to manipulate, like, for example, the camera API. I'll show some examples of that shortly. And then we have the certified apps. These are part of the OS, and currently only Mozilla and its partners are able to create those. Now, that said, a lot of the certified apps, the APIs in those certified apps are available, are actually tested there and then moved to a privileged status. So, and I'll show some examples of some of the ones that have already moved from certified to privileged shortly. But that said, certified apps are also, a lot of the functionality that's available in certified apps is available through web activities, which we'll also discuss. Firefox, just like any other mobile provider, has a marketplace. That said, you can host apps on your website. You don't have to be on the Firefox marketplace, but and we have a Moz Apps API, so you can put a little script in your landing page to install those apps. But with the marketplace, if you have a privileged app, it has to go through our marketplace verification for obvious security reasons. And so this is what a screenshot from the marketplace. It's got games and things like that, and I'll show you some examples of some of the things that we have in it already. This is a screenshot of the some of the core apps that are available in Firefox OS. This is just the home screen. This is settings, much like any other phone, and then we have email, calendars, clocks. We also have an FM radio, if you're interested in that. And then we have there's the marketplace app on the phone. This is what you would use to search up apps and install them. In addition to that, we have social apps like Twitter and Facebook, and then BuzzFeed. Those are some examples. We also have games. And so this is Age of Barbarians on Firefox OS. Firefox OS also supports WebGL, which is pretty cool. And in later versions, the performance is greatly increased. So this is just a Crystal Skull demo of showing WebGL. And then obviously we have some big name games like Cut the Rope and some of the Disney products as well. So, and we also, one thing we've really strived hard is to get a lot of indie game developers. This is Captain Rogers, developed by an indie developer, and it's a fantastic little game to play on the phone. So, as I stated earlier, Firefox OS, the only difference between it and the standard browser version of Gecko is that we have these web APIs implemented. Now, a lot of these web APIs are also available on the desktop, but the ones that are specific to hardware may only be implemented for Firefox OS. And we keep all of those tracked on this wiki page, and you can this thing this particular page shows several things. It shows all the APIs down the left side of the description, but we also put them on standards tracks, and you can see where they're at in that process under the standardization. And then the availability field, which is a keyed legend on if a particular API is available for your specific device, or available for the browser itself. So I'm going to talk about each one of these in a little bit of detail. Is when we talk about web APIs, there's, like I said earlier, there's really three categories. There's the the hosted app APIs. The permissions are pretty much open to anyone. And then you have the privileged apps, which are APIs are only available to privileged applications, and then you also have the certified ones. And some of the things that we're doing for hosted apps are things like, just recently in 2.0 we implemented the final the 3 APIs for WebRTC. So you got full WebRTC support on a hosted app or a packaged app, packaged privileged app. And you also have things like the vibration API, screen orientation, geolocation, and you also have access to IndexedDB. I'll also say a little bit about payments too. We have web payments, which allow apps to be either paid apps, in-app payments, and you can also do things like use Interactive to do advertising and generate revenue that way. But so these are a list of all these specific APIs. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. It's fairly simple. The ambient light sensor is measuring the lux rating, and so we have a on-device light event that is fired when that device is red, and then you can just include that in your HTML app and get its values. Fairly simple. A little bit more complex one is the geolocation API. We actually support, in the geolocation object, we support 2 function calls: get current position and watch current position, so you can constantly watch it for, say, like a compass app. In this case, I'm just showing get current position, and then I got a callback pass to it specifying the position, and as it's updated, it'll write into a HTML field the basic coordinates. You'll note at the bottom I did have to add a permission to my webapp.manifest. That is the manifest file for the Firefox OS apps. In this case, permissions is asking for geolocation, and you can give a description of why you want that permission. And what we'll show is a screenshot from the right is when the user is using your app, they'll get that share or don't share menu for geolocation. This is not specific to a Firefox OS app, but I always put it in here because people ask this all the time. How do I know when my app has been minimized or when it's displaying on the screen? So you can add a visibility change event listener, and you can know when your app is either hidden or it has focus. So that's fairly simple. A couple other things for generic Firefox OS apps. Starting with Firefox 1.3 and higher, we added worker support. In this case, we start a worker thread, post a message to it, and on the worker implementation, it just it reads messages and then posts data back after 1 to 3 seconds. You can see it's just post message, hi, give me the data back. So that's a fairly simple example, but shows that we do have workers working on it, and we are in the process of implementing service workers on Firefox OS now as well. Promises are available starting with Firefox 1.4 and greater, and then this essentially does the same thing that the previous example did, just resolves after 1 to 3 seconds and posts that back. Fairly straightforward and simple. Now the next level down is the privileged apps, and these are things like device storage, TCP sockets, contacts API, camera API. Now the camera API used to be a certified app. Now certified API, now it's moved to privileged as of 2.0. And then we also have, which are pretty cool new feature that's going to be just available now, is NFC API, which is, you can really make some cool examples for using NFC to communicate with other devices. And the only thing you need to add to your manifest in order to use any of these APIs is type privileged. And it does have to be a packaged app, zipped up, and pushed to the phone. Here's an example of basically using the Moz contact constructor to create a contact. We pass in the name and the value of that. You can fill out the whole contact information. You can look on MDN for the docs on that. But all you do is use the Moz contact save method to save that object, and it gets saved to the contacts. You get like most APIs, you get an on success or an on error or on failure type callback to let you know whether things were successful or not. And then in the permissions tab, you have to add the contacts access read write. If you were just reading contacts, then you would just put read. All right, the certified apps, and I'm not going to go into detail on any of these because currently they're not available to be used by standard app developers, but hopefully some of these will be making their way up to privileged status. You know, we have, you know, the settings API for manipulating the settings on the phone, web SMS for sending messages, telephony for making phone calls, things like that. Now, the reason I put these here is that some of the functions that are available in these are also available to even hosted apps through something called web activities. And web activities is essentially it's a way of an app delegating an activity to another app. And it puts a user interaction in between so that the user is expressly giving permission for this to happen. For example, I want to send a SMS. Then, well, I'd use from my app, then I would use a web activity to do that. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Web activities are just different operations, whether it's browsing, dialing a phone, viewing a web page, or picking a picture, and that we have specific names, and you can see a list of them here: browse, dial, record, view, configure. Those are the basic names. This is not limited to just these names. A web activity can be created by any app, and the name can be whatever you desire. Now, that said, these are the default ones that a lot of the system apps understand and will deal with. But if I were writing an app to handle an activity for another app, I would add this activities section to my manifest. And all this does is you know, just basically lay out the activities that I support. And in my particular application, in this example, this app supports the pick activity, but it doesn't support the pick activity for everything. That's what the filters field's for. Basically, what this says is very, very redundant type field with all images and image JPEG and image PNG. So the filters here are just basically saying, hey, my application here will support any pick operation, and I will return an image to whoever asks me for an image. And the disposition just says whether it's in a new window or an inline overlay over the app. And it can return if it returns a value like the blob in this particular case for an image, it'll return true. And the href is the location in the app that handles the pick operation itself. So, and once I've added that to my application, then I have to handle that activity. So we set a Moz set message handler activity with my function, and in this particular case, I'm just looking for the pick name, and then I do something with that. In this case, it may be going to a phone photo gallery, or taking a picture with a camera, or some way of retrieving that image. If we get the picture back, then we post that result. Else, we post an error. So that's the extent of the web activity handler for the application that's going to handle the activity. The sender on the other side, if you want to use another app like phone dialer or something like that, then you would use a Moz activity within your application. And in this case, we're saying new Moz activity using the constructor. And then we're saying we want to do a pick operation, and we specifically only want to look for JPEG images. Return me a list of all the applications that will give me an image. And in this case, the current default ones in the system are wallpaper, gallery, and camera. So those will show up in the list. The user picks one of those, and it'll work them through actually picking an image. If your app handles image activities, pick image activities, it'll show up in this list as well. And then once in your code, you have to handle the success or failure of that activity. And in this particular case, all we're doing is, when it's successful, is creating an image element and taking the blob that's returned and putting it into an image. And then we do nothing on the error. That's not quality code. All right, so as an example of using an activity, here's a new dial activity. So this will not dial the phone for your application, but it will launch the dialer with the number already pre-populated, and then the user hits the send button. And the reason this is done this way is to prevent malicious code from dialing phones or sending SMS messages and things like that. All right. All the APIs that are covered are there. We have a Robert Nyman developed this Firefox OS boilerplate app, and you can either Google that or I can I'll upload the slides. But it's a simple app that just shows off most of the APIs and what they can do. And I'm going to actually show this app in just a few minutes to show you what things that can be done with it. But it's just basic interaction with the web APIs. The nice thing about these activities and Firefox OS apps in general, most of them can be ran on an Android device. If you have Firefox for Android, you can download apps from the Firefox Marketplace and run them as long as the developer has marked them for use on Android. And you can download them to Android and run them. Give you an example. This is a little bumper application that I wrote, just a little simple pool style game. And there's on the left is the Firefox OS simulator, on the right is the Android simulator. And essentially, we have what we call an APK factory that's available from the Firefox Marketplace that allows you to download an APK for a Firefox OS app. And this can be done automatically just by using Firefox for Android and going to the Marketplace and installing the app there. Or you can sideload it by using curl or something like that, and contacting the controller application.apk and pass the manifest of the application you want to create. In this case, that manifest URL is pretty long, but it's available in the Marketplace dashboard, so you can actually find it fairly simple. In this case, that's the manifest web app. That's that manifest file that we've been talking about through the beginning of this talk. And then bumpertest.apk is what's actually generated, and then I install that into my simulator. That's all I'm going to say about Firefox OS at the moment, but I'm going to start working through some demos and showing you some of the things that you can do with Firefox OS. So let me get out of this. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is open up something we call Firefox Web IDE. Now, what the Web IDE is essentially just an editor and that allows me to connect and debug to different devices and to simulators as well. On the left-hand side, I can create a new app that has some templates that you can walk through building an app, or I can open a packaged app, which is this zipped up package that we talked about earlier, or I can open a hosted app, which is essentially an app that's stored on another server, and then what I can do then is I can edit it or I can debug it and things like that. This is a little game I created called Paddle Squirrel. It's just a kayak and squirrel down a river. If I look, here's this manifest file that we talk about, that I was talking about earlier. One of the nice things about the editor is if I make a mistake in my manifest, for example, and leave a comment out, it does automatic validation of the manifest itself. I can also modify my code, things like that. Let me save that. And I can also look at things like, let me take a look at some of my images. So here's my kayak and different versions of it. Here's some of the rocks that are in the river, things like that. So in order to get this to actually work and run, what I have to do is actually decide where I want to connect it to. And if I look at this particular list down here, if I hit this drop down, which is pretty cool, so you can see the first thing listed is a USB device called the Flame. That is a test device that we use and is a pretty high-end phone for showing Firefox OS. In addition, I have a set of simulators, and right now I have versions 1.2 all the way to 3.0 installed. 3.0 is currently in development, and one of the cool things about 3.0, you'll notice that we have USB devices listed. We are currently working on Wi-Fi debugging, and if you watch the Hacks blog, you'll probably see a post on that next week that shows how to Wi-Fi debug Firefox OS, which will be very, very cool. Hopefully we'll have a video together showing how that's done. But those are the simulators. I can also just recently added into the Firefox Developer Edition is the ability to connect with a product called Valence. Is the ability to connect to Safari on iOS and debug apps, also to debug apps with Chrome on Android, and in addition to Chrome on desktop. So those are the different things that I can do. In this particular case, I'm just going to fire open the simulator so you can see what that looks like. All right, so this is the simulator for Firefox OS, and you can see it's got my different applications and things like that. In order to get my app to run on that, all I have to do is hit the play button on my controls. And you can see fairly simple game. Let me run it into a browser. And it's just a simple game showing how that works. Now, I could debug that app on the simulator by hitting the wrench, but I want to show actually connecting to a real device. So I'll bring up my camera. Hopefully you can see that. And let me open the Web IDE back up. And so I can now select the flame. And the first thing I'll be asked is, will I allow a connection? And did I allow it? Let's see. Yep, it's connected. So you'll see it show up with a blue background here, and it shows connected. To run this app, well, let me start with a boilerplate app first. All right, so this is the boilerplate app that I was discussing earlier. If you look at the code, most of the code is in webapp.js, and you can see these are Moz activities that I talked about earlier. But if I want to run that on there, I can just hit the play button. And I'm using a development build, so hopefully a development build on the phone, so hopefully I won't have to do a restart on it, but if I do, I hope no one throws eggs. So I can stop the app here, reload it, or I can debug it. If I select debug, what I'm showing here are the DevTools for Firefox in general, but specifically in relation to how they're used with Firefox OS. Here's the inspector. The inspector allows me to modify the HTML, the DOM, and manipulate it, and do a few other things like modify the CSS and things like that. I'm going to talk about a little bit. If you can see that as I move it up and down across the screen, I'm getting a live highlighter showing all the different buttons and HTML nodes that are available in this particular app. I can do things like, let's go to the body tag, and we have here's the background color. I can say, well, I don't really like that color. Let me select this color, and I can drag it around, and you can see it's changing color live. I can use this little feature is called is the element selector. If I click on it, then I can actually select different items, and I don't know if I got that one or not. Probably not. Yep, there it goes. And this is the actual title for the app. So I can just go in and edit the node, like that, and my change is automatically applied. Now, if I pick an image using this pick button, this is the web activity that I discussed earlier. I'm going to choose gallery, and I have a mundane picture of a chair. So I will choose that, hit done, and all I'm doing in this particular case is just adding the image back to the web app. If I use the element selector now and select the image, all right, it shows me the blob that's there, and you can mouse over and get an actual screenshot of it there as well. I can right-click on and edit the HTML. I can also do things like delete the node, and in this particular case, I'm going to. If I want to refresh the app, all I do is select refresh on that, and it'll reload it and show it. In addition to that, we also have this thing. This is fairly new. Is this event bubble? And all it does is anything that has an event attached to it will show this event. If I click on it, I can do a couple things here. It shows me whether it bubbles or not. I can click on the code and look through the code here, or I can hit this button here and open it up in the debugger. I'm not going to do that because I'm actually going to show that in just a second. All right. The next thing on item that's pretty valuable is the console. And the JavaScript console. I mean, the console does a lot of things. It allows me to manipulate the JavaScript context, the current one we're working in for the app, and also displays things like network operations if I want to do XHR requests and logs and warning and things like that. But it also has code completion on the toolbar. So let me just do a simple alert for now. You can see it shows up on my phone. Just cancel that out. And then, so there we have it's part of the navigator object. We can determine if it's online by using the online field property. And if I'm just going to check that, and it's currently, my phone is not online while my desktop is. So there's various things you can do with that. in the JavaScript debugger, this is where you're going to edit and manipulate your JavaScript. These are all the source files for the different JavaScript that this app makes up. We also have a call stack, so if you're debugging, you can see where you are in your call stack. We have things like toggle black boxing. If you have a minified piece of source that you want to black box and not step into, then you can hit that feature there. And we can also prettify minified source as well. And then this just enables and disables all breakpoints. These are the VCR controls for stepping through the debugger. So let's take a look at an example. Right here is the pick image button that you saw me hit earlier. I'm doing a console time activity, and I'll explain why I'm doing that shortly. But I'm going to do that pick image operation again. Select pick. If I can get my finger to work. All right, you can see that it stops on the debugger. I can do step over, step into, and step out. And over to the right here, we can add a watch expression. We can filter the variables. You can also search for different variables and things like this. These are all the variables and what scope they're under. So you can look at all the variables and manipulate them and change values and things like that. Another thing we can do here too is, this is a fairly new feature for Firefox Developer Tools, is you can actually trap all events. In this particular case, Web App has 30 nodes that have a click event. So let me clear that breakpoint and let it play out. I'm going to cancel that operation, and then I'm going to click on the click here, and then I'm going to hit that button again. And you see it stops at the same location. This is the onClick operation, puts me back right where I was at. So let's just clear that and play it out. Cancel that. All right. Not only can you debug Firefox OS apps like that, you can actually debug the operating system itself. Let me stop this app for a second. Actually, you know what? I want to show one other thing in there. One of the things that we've done, we're doing a good deal of work on, is the performance tabs. And right now I'm going to show a couple different features of performance for timeline, while in the next couple releases of Firefox, there'll likely be some changes with this, a little bit more combining of the functions into one tab. But right now, I'll show you what we have. This pretty cool feature. It's called Timeline. And what it allows you to do is track the time of things events that occur. And then in this particular case, you can calculate restyles, reflows, paints, DOM events, function calls, and the console activity. Well, you saw I did a console activity earlier in that code example. I can also track the memory that's being used here by selecting that button. Now, if I start the recording process, I'm going to hit that, and I do go through that whole operation of the pick again. All right, I'll pick the chair and hit done, and I'm going to stop the recording right there. You'll notice here's that console activity. In the debugger, what I do on that web app line is I start a console activity here on the pick, and then right here, once I have my own success or own error, then I end the activity. So, and if you look in the timeline, it shows that activity across here. Well, I was more interested in what happens with the image afterwards. So I can drill into this particular area and see. So I had a DOM event, a couple function calls, then a restyle, and a couple reflows, a paint, a restyle, and a paint. And this large paint here is actually the image being painted to the screen. I can see what memory min and max that I'm using and the average, which is a pretty cool little feature to be able to diagnose. When you have inefficient restyles and reflows, you'll get jank in your app. So this is a great way for performance tuning that. All right, let me show just a couple more things here. Like I said, you can also debug system apps. Now, what you have to do is you have to select runtime and device, runtime info. And this will tell you I have unrestricted DevTools privileges. This is something that most likely when you first get your phone set up, you'll have to click on this. There'll be a button here that you can click to get those extra permissions. But what it'll show me is all these system apps. These are my system apps. Here's my home screen. All right, so I'm going to go back to the inspector. And if you see, I move it around, and it's showing me my different stuff, my different nodes for my home screen. If I go to the style editor essentially allows, as all the CSS that's loaded, I can edit them, save them, import existing ones, or build a new one. But I can also use this feature for toggling the style's visibility. And if you look, you'll see what's happening as I disable each one of these styles. It gets ugly quite quickly. So you get an idea of which style is handling what feature or function on the phone. If I go back to the inspector, I can use the element selector just like I did earlier, except this time I want to select the Firefox logo there, the icon. So this is in the guide. This is a div for guide grid, and this is just that one element. If I click over here, these are. Let me click over here, and then this is a scale that's happening, a transform scale that's happening on that icon. So let me just make a change to it. So you can see that it's live editing the home screen. I can scale it back and do like that. If I scroll back up here, this is the guide grid that is basically all of the icons that are on the screen. These are all my styles. I have my computed styles, fonts, the boxing model for padding and things like this. And if we had any animations, you can actually debug those as well. Let me go back to these rules. The guide grid here, I can click on the style, and it takes me where that styling is being done. And I can do something like transform and do rotate. Let's see if that'll work. And you can see my grid is actually rotating 20 degrees. And so that's a pretty cool little feature. And let me show you some of the performance. I'm going to show you some of the performance tools for my app that I'd worked on earlier. So I want to open up this paddle squirrel game. And if I play it, hopefully see it on the phone. All right. And I don't have it turned on right now, but you do have a developer toolbar overlay on the phone itself, so I could actually get frame rates and things like that, and memory usage and things like that on the phone. But if I'm looking at here, I want to debug that app. We have something called the Canvas editor, and this is a Canvas-based game. It's not a WebGL-based game, but the Canvas editor allows me to inspect the WebGL context or the Canvas context and see how an individual frame is being created. So if I restart, let me reload that now. If I restart the app, if I hit this button here, it's taking a screenshot of how that particular screen was created. And it gives me a set of VCR controls that I can walk through and look at each of the operations. So if I go back to the beginning, I have nothing. And then I can either step through it or just use the down arrow. And I have essentially, this is a very large app as far as memory is concerned, because I have 2 pictures of the Niagara River in here that are very high res, and that's what's taking up a lot of memory. So I draw them twice, one off screen, one on screen. And then as I'm working through the different context calls, you can see I do something like this. Will take a second, but it's drawing the image of the kayak, and then we translate it based on whether the boat is turned or whatever. Then we draw a couple pictures of the wake. You really can't see them in the screenshot, but it just basically gives you a nice way to figure out how the screen was created. The last thing I put on there is some text at the bottom. You probably saw that right there. The X position, the Y position of the boat, and things like that. And then the request animation frame. You can actually click into any one of those just by selecting the link there. Okay. Another feature that we've added is called the Web Audio Editor. This particular app uses web audio and the Web Audio API. So if I reload this now with that enabled, you can see I have an audio buffer source node, a gain node, and a destination node. When I click on it, the paddle, you can see I'm adding extra sources. I can click on any one of these nodes and make modifications to the Web API node, and you see the garbage collection cleaned it up. Well, one of the things I do actually, I'd recorded the Niagara River when I was up there last, and it's my background for the game. So right now I have it turned off because it can be quite annoying if you're trying to talk, but I'll turn it up so you can possibly hear it. So that basically have that running in the background. 0. That's basically the Web Audio Editor, and allows you to manipulate the nodes. You can zoom in and out and things like that as well. All right, so last thing I'm going to show you on this particular app is the Performance tab. Now, if I want to, this is like I said earlier, this timeline feature and the performance tab will most likely be combined in the next couple of releases, but we'll have stuff on Mozilla Hacks, the Hacks blog to discuss it, so keep an eye out on that. All right, but if I'm going along, I want to start my performance, and then I'm going to stop it. And all this it does is takes a snapshot of what happened in that particular time frame. And if you look, we've got a nice graph that gives me my minimum and maximum frames per second, my average frames per second. Then I can also highlight where my time is being spent: network, inputs, garbage collection, storage, Gecko, or graphics calls. And you can see a large part of them are done in graphics calls. So let me expand this out a bit. I can also drill into a particular area. So if I want to drill in this area, I just highlight it like that, hit the plus button. And what this is going to show me is the total time in a particular set of a particular function, and the self time. The total time is essentially all the time in that function and all functions that are contained within that one. That's the total time. Self time is actually how much time was spent in that one particular function, not counting the nested stuff. So if I look at this timer that's firing, you know, I can drill into it and go down the code. Or look at this tick, for example. I'm running a script, and in this case it's called loop, and I spent virtually no time in that loop, but some nested call is where it's spending most of its time. Excuse me. All right, so you can get an idea of where you can dig into the code and see where the actual time is being spent. Most of it's being spent in this draw command. I can click on that and go to where it's happening. So that's the performance tab. In addition to that, I can do this, what we call this monitor feature. Let me close this, and let's refresh that out. That may have it just blown up on me. Try that one more time. Okay, I may have to stop the web ID real quick and let's restart it. All right, if I go into the web ID here, and let's try it one more time. It's asking me to allow a connection. All right, refresh it. You can see it's tracking real-time memory usage, and as I said earlier, it's a fairly hefty little app for near 80 megs, and as I do different things, you can see the memory is affected. And this feature is likely to be combined with the timeline and the performance tab. Okay, one other quick one I'm going to show is this profiler example. Let me run that on the device, and hopefully it'll show up. All right, this is just a simple canvas with a run code button that does nothing. And so let me debug that. And I want to talk a little bit about Scratchpad. Now what Scratchpad does is it's similar to the console, except it allows me to do multi-line stuff. And I can do things like if I want to inspect the window object, I can just click the inspect, and it'll show my properties for the window object, and I can manipulate those there. I can also do straight JavaScript evaluation by saying something like 4 + 5. And let's display that, and it'll give me the response in a comment. We also have this run button, which actually runs the script and adds it to the context or whatever. So in this particular example, I have a draw ball function that essentially does nothing. Let me see if I can find it. Yep, there it is. Draw ball function that does nothing. That's what hitting the button is tied to. So if I go back to my Scratchpad and I open up a file, I did this with the reasoning behind. I wanted to determine if an on-screen using multiple draw commands or using multiple draw commands or using an off-screen canvas was quicker. In this particular case, I did a loop count where I'm going 60 times in a loop and changing the colors a bit and drawing a circle. The whole reason for that is to give it a kind of like a 3D effect. So if I run that, it actually adds that draw ball function to the code. Now if I hit run code, you can see I have a little white ball bouncing around on my screen. I could use my performance tab at this time to go look at that, or use the frame rate indicator on the display to determine what kind of frame rate I was getting with that. But I can also, and so the other thing, that was that one function. I wanted to try the other one. So it allows me to do them both. And this one just sets up an off-screen canvas and really does a large loop, but it only does it the one time, the 60 time, and draws it to the off-screen canvas. And I just draw the image here. So now if I run that, I did change the color a bit. So I don't know why that stopped. Okay. So if let's see if that ran it. Nope. Hang on a second. Let's try running that one more time. You can see that the ball's a different color, and it is a great deal faster in this case. But the flame device is very, very fast, so it's a little hard to determine that for this particular app. But in a more complex app, it would make a lot of sense to use that. All right, so that's all I'm going to show on the DevTools piece there. But I do want to show a couple other unique features, and let's see if I can go into my code. And I'm going to go to a WebGL example. If I open this WebGL example up, and it's just a 3D WebGL created screen. If I go into Developer Tools and toggle my tools, and I have to turn this on because I have it turned off right now. We also have a network and storage API screens, but I'm not going to show those today. But I'm going to show something called the shader editor. And what the shader editor allows me to do is manipulate let me reload that page a second. Allows me to modify my fragment and vertex shaders on the fly. And this is the code just running for each one of those. So I can do something like RBB, change the color. All right, I want to change my ambient light. Let's try a couple things, or my diffuse light. And you see it's gotten dark. I can take the numbers up higher, and it allows me to manipulate the shaders on the fly, which is, I think, a pretty cool feature, especially if you're doing WebGL development. And the last thing I'll show, and this is specific probably mainly to if you're doing mobile apps and with different screen size, you can always open up something like the boilerplate app. Let me open that up. Where's it at? Okay. So if I open that up, and then I can do, doesn't look very good in that resolution, but I can go into my tools, web developer, and go to my responsive design view. And what this just allows me to do is show what the app's going to look like in different formats. So 800 by 1200, you can get an idea. You can also flip it to landscape or portrait and see what it's like. You can take screenshots or simulate events. So I know we're running a little low on time, and I want to give anybody who wants to ask a question. But before I do that, I would like to point out that if you've got any questions, obviously MDN is a great resource for the open web. Go to the MDN. But we are very, very interested in what your feedback is on the Firefox developer tools. So if there's something that you like or want to do, or want to see our tools do, please go to our user voice channel, which is just ffdevtools.uservoice.com, and enter an idea that you may have. For example, JS editor, inspect WebSocket connections, things like that, memory monitor, and our product team will respond to see if that feature is already planned, it's already in Mozilla or something of that. So please use this feature and go out and at the bare minimum, vote for the features that you like the most. We're very interested in getting the feedback on that. So I think that's all I'm going to cover. I've burned up somewhere around 50 minutes, so I apologize if I didn't leave enough time for some questions. But I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share.
It's all good. That was fantastic. Thanks, Jason. So yeah, guys, please jump in if you have any questions. I can get the ball rolling with some that were emailed in, but would really love everyone that's actually watching live to throw some in. Yeah, a couple questions that we got in via email. It sounds actually like the last piece you were just showing might be where this question's going, but someone asked, how can I get involved with Mozilla open source project? So what's a good place to start for that?
Well, if you go to the Mozilla contribution, we have a Mozilla contribution page. So, and it's a starting place for anybody that wants. And we would love to have as many people that want to contribute to the Mozilla project as possible. Mozilla is founded on the open web, and we don't believe in restricting that for anybody. And one of the things that what makes Mozilla is its community and its vibrant community and the number of contributors that people write code. It's sometimes from my standpoint of technical evangelism is kind of difficult because so many people are contributing code and adding functions and features so quick. Sometimes it can be difficult to keep up with.
Gotcha. We just got a live question actually from Kenrick, who I think is watching the live broadcast. He was curious about, does this API support promises?
Yes. It's not, the promise architecture is not actually implementing all the web APIs yet, but you can create your own promises on Firefox OS. I think that was version 1.4 and higher. The promise architecture is in place.
Cool.
Great.
Another one that was emailed in. This is a little more theoretical since this person, I don't think, watched the presentation. But how do you think Firefox OS is going to impact the mobile market? How do you think it's going to sort of disrupt, the current leaders?
Yeah, and I will say this: Firefox OS is not created to go head-to-head with Android or iOS. That's not why we created it. We wanted a low-cost alternative that are open to the world. And I've done quite a bit of Android development, quite a bit of iOS development, and I am a big fan of the open web. And it's my belief that it's much quicker to develop apps for web apps than it is to do Objective-C or some other language, Java, for example. So that's just my opinion. I'm sure many will disagree with that, but I think it actually opens up more locations. I mean, more developers, more locations as well. And I see a question here. Someone said, "Can I use Angular or React?" And the answer is yes. We do have a CSP guide that you should follow if you're going to use either one of those for different restrictions that we place on content. So, but yes, we have examples of Angular and React working on Firefox OS. Great question.
Awesome. What do you recommend is a good place to start for developers who are, fairly experienced but haven't done anything with Firefox OS?
Yeah, and if you go to the MDN page, there's a link just for Firefox OS, and it's getting started guides and things like that. And granted, I only showed half the presentation for Firefox OS, but the reason I showed the DevTools is because they are very key in how you manipulate an app, and you can see from the presentation it's not very difficult. And so, but to get started, I would suggest going through MDN.
Cool. Kenrick just sent another question in. How does Firefox OS compare to something like Cordova, or if it's comparable at all?
And that is a great question. And I didn't show this in the presentation, but Firefox OS is actually a target for Cordova now. I've actually worked on that project with some of the developers at Mozilla, and I think we have like 15 different plugins for Cordova. So and essentially their APIs are a little bit different than our APIs. So what our plugins do is map Cordova APIs to Firefox OS APIs, and there's no compilation step because it's HTML, which is pretty cool. In addition to that, we also have something called Node Firefox. So if you're a Node developer, you can also run, and it allows you to do a lot of the stuff you saw me do with the simulator, installing apps and things like that from the command line. And that was actually just came out, I think, in February, which is pretty cool.
Awesome. Shaitan, who's in the room with us, can I use the developers tools you showed to develop a web-based app?
Absolutely, and my only reason for showing them in the context that I showed them is because I was dealing with a Firefox OS device. But those are our developer tools, and frankly, from the browser standpoint, there are probably more features available for the general web app environment, and that's only because there are things that have to be implemented on Firefox OS in order to interact with the DevTools. But yes, absolutely, and we hope you do.
Awesome. Yeah, anyone else, feel free to jump in with any questions. Those were the big ones that we had ahead of time. But Jason, what else should people sort of follow to keep up with upcoming releases and stuff like that?
And I'll tell you this. So if you go to Mozilla Hacks blog, that is, we routinely update code that's coming out, cool features. We delineate cool features that are coming out, and we're making an active effort to stay on top of all of our releases, so you know exactly what's coming out in a specific version.
Cool. Some questions about devices. It looks like, can you recommend a specific device to install Firefox OS on? Can you root an Android to do it?
And so there's several devices that are available. If you go to Building Firefox OS on MDN, you'll see an example of using, say, the Nexus to push Firefox OS to. I think that there's a Sony device. I can't remember which one. There's a Sony device available, but there's several Android devices. But we also have the Flame device. It's a developer edition. I don't think those are for sale anymore, but I'll have to check to see what the status of those are. But there's several Android devices that it can be pushed on. And if you don't see one on your list, then either volunteer to help port it, or throw something out on Bugzilla asking that you'd like to have that. And the community is obviously very responsive to those type of things.
Yeah, the beauty of the open source world, sure.
Well, so if you look at for the IoT boards and things like the KDDI initiative, and Raspberry Pi, I'm very interested in seeing Firefox OS expand beyond just phones. I would like to see it in all mobile development.
For sure. Cool. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we can start to wrap up. I don't want to take too much more of your time, Jason, but gosh, thank you so much for walking us through that. And for everybody watching, if there's any part of it you feel like you need to revisit, again, this is all being live recorded to the Code Mentor YouTube channel, so definitely go back, rewatch how Jason did a lot of that stuff. Oh, we just got another question. Is there an app store ready for it? Yeah, so he showed a little bit of that. There is a marketplace, right? Jason, where's the best place to find the marketplace fast?
Just Firefox, marketplace.firefox.com, I think.
Right, okay. Marketplace.firefox.com. Cool. Yeah, so this will be available on YouTube. We're also going to do we'll do a written tutorial sort of version of a lot of what Jason discussed, so that'll be on Code Mentor. And we do have a bunch of experts on Code Mentor that are experienced with Firefox development, so if any of you guys are working on projects and need assistance, obviously Code Mentor is at your disposal. And yeah, if there's nothing else, I think I'll say good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you find yourself today, and thanks so much.
And thanks for having me on, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.